Welcome back to the Freedom Podcast. This is me, your host, Josh Snozel, and this is Dave, Pastor
Come
Dave.
on.
He's back,
And
Pastor
Dave.
David.
I've been downgraded from Pastor David last week to Pastor Dave. If I come on next week, it'll just be, this is Dave, and then the week after, it's be some bloke. Yeah.
Do you know what I noticed as well about our podcast last week is that we say mate so much. Mate. Well, listen to this, mate. So we'll try and decrease the mates this week, but it's quite difficult when you're with your
Josh,
mate.
Somebody texted me saying, I've never realised how Herefordian you are, as in me. And I was like, no way. I'm a Welsh boy I'm a Southern boy now, living in South Carolina, but apparently I've got the Hereford twang. It's been infiltrated.
Have you picked up any Southern ways, accent, or words?
I don't think I've picked up anything on the accent yet. I haven't quite dropped a yawl just yet because I feel like
Thank
a yawl
goodness.
in my own accent. So, oh no, I love it. I'm throwing myself in. I love it. There are a few very Southern cultural experiences that I have locked in the month of August. I'm not going to talk about them right now, but I'm excited.
I love it for a Southern person, but I just can't abide it in someone who is British, but they're using the Southern ways. But hey,
I'm down. I'm ready to go.
Oh my gosh. Well, last week we talked about social media. We talked about friend or foe. We talked about having a healthy relationship with social media, Dave. And we put out at the end, hey, if there's some questions, maybe we'll do a part 2 and we'll do a bit of a Q&A. So we had a few questions come in the last week. And so we thought we'd spend a bit of time today answering some of those questions and gleaning from your sagacious nature. So the Welsh sage himself.
What? Sagacious. Nature. I was like,
well, it's like being wise, isn't it? Sagacious. You old sage. So we're going to ask a few questions. We're going to see what we can learn, what we can help the people with. And so we've got some of these questions that come in from people with name, and others it was a bit more anonymous. But here is one from our friend Charmaine. And so,
hey, Charmaine.
And Charmaine says this: I write a very sporadic blog. It's 99% faith-based content, includes some of my learning, life experience. Do you think these are helpful to share on social media, or best kept as a personal hobby? So first of all, thanks for your question, Charmaine. Thanks for writing in. And what are your thoughts on that, Dave? What's your initial response on that? If you're writing something that is very Christian centric, is there a purpose in posting it into a wider forum?
I mean, I think there definitely can be, absolutely, because obviously we use, one of the things that's amazing about social media and the internet is that, it's not limited in what people are using it for. It's not limited to a particular audience or a particular time. I think the better question to ask around whether you should or shouldn't post something is twofold. One is like, what's your motivation in posting it? If you're writing something and really you want to post it, and I'm not saying this is Charmaine, she's asking the question, but in reality, it's like if we're writing something that's very personal, maybe it's quite cathartic for ourselves, maybe it's something, it's like journaling. Sometimes that's not super like healthy to share with the world, particularly if it's like your own personal stuff. But really, it's the motivation why you would post it. If it's a case of, hey, do you know what? This is what God's speaking to me, and I just want to share it, and maybe it'll bless somebody, maybe it'll help somebody. I think there's not a lot of harm in that myself. But if we're trying to get attention, if we're trying to build our own platform for reasons that aren't, it's really the motivation factor, and again, it can come down to you personally. You might not be writing it for those reasons, but then when you start to post it, you get drawn into, oh, they commented, oh, they liked, and actually it can move away from perhaps the original reason why God gave you an inspiration to do it in the first place. So I think you've got to look at motivation. And then secondly, the other side of the coin is, I just think if it's something that's really personal, I think we just got to be really careful with how much we share on that. I'll never forget in my young 20s, Pastor G pulling me into his office, and I'd had the opportunity to share at Barbarians. I'd just I'd unfurled the sails, like every detail, it was kind of all of my issues. And of course, there's
I do
something good
remember
about that.
that,
You're
Dave.
humbling yourself and meeting people where they're at. Yeah, you can't imagine that. And G just lovingly said, just want to encourage you. I think you overshared in that point. And it was some of the best wisdom I've ever had. That authenticity doesn't mean you tell everybody everything. I know Charmaine is maybe more saying it's more Christian, is there value in it? But I think a lot of our blogs can be very personal. So I think that's a good question to ask when you're thinking about it. What do you reckon, Josh?
I think there's no harm in sharing it. I think that
Yeah,
one of the big dangers, I think, when anyone takes into sharing stuff on social media, is measuring its value on engagement. And I think that
yeah,
you have to just watch yourself, that you don't get drawn into looking at how many people have read this, how many people have commented, how many people have
yeah,
liked, because I
100%.
think that then it can become a point then of discouragement, frustration, comparison. And so I think
Yeah,
that you've got to be careful around that. And I remember on Insta stories a few years ago, I went to reply on someone's Insta story, and they had turned off the option to reply. And I thought, that is such an interesting thing. Like, why would
yeah,
you not want people to respond? And I thought about it. I didn't ask the person, so these are some of my assumptions. But I thought maybe it's because sometimes when you post something and no one says
yeah.
anything about what you just posted, not even a laughy emoji, Dave, not even a heart emoji, do you know what I mean?
Or a
You're not
thumbs
even
up,
asking for
please.
to write something. Just please, did you not think that was likable in some way? I just spent a whole 8 seconds putting this post together, and that no one does that. You can feel a bit like, oh, what's the point? Why bother? Does no one care? And I think that this
Yeah,
person perhaps looked at it like, actually, I'm just going to post this because it's things that
yeah.
I care about and I value. And if I don't allow the option to be able to respond, then I can never be discouraged or
Disappointed.
frustrated by it, because
Yeah,
it's like,
it's
well,
good.
there's no option. This is my advert for what I'm doing in my life. This is my shop window, if you like, just letting
Yeah, it's
people
good. I
know.
like it.
But it doesn't mean that it's become something that I'm finding gain or value in. And I've definitely felt that
Yeah.
personally. If I was me and my brother were having a conversation the other day, because I like to post about bread. And so I share that. So I got back from my holiday recently, and I got home, and one of
First
the
post,
first
Josh.
things I did, I didn't think I'd posted about my holiday, really.
You
I was
didn't.
just like, but I'm home and I've made bread. And I just had 2 loaves that I'd made, and they were amazing, Dave.
Oh, they did look good,
They
mate.
smell amazing. They also the sound of bread. Now we're getting into my passion. Where the sound of bread, when you bring it out of the oven, it's been so hot in there, and then it comes into the cooler air of the kitchen. It makes this like crisp sound. It's like crunching just from the change of temperature. It's so good.
If you're
Um,
listening to this on Spotify, get over to YouTube just to see
just
the
listen.
level
Oh my gosh, to the
of
sound of
enthusiasm in Josh's
crunching bread.
face.
It's so good. Anyway, um, so I posted recently, and about my bread, and then my brother Isaac replied with a laughy emoji, and I was like, "What? What's that about?" I was like, "This isn't a joke. This is me sharing my passion with the world, and you're choosing to react with a laughy emoji. What's funny about this?" So I had to message him and say, "What was that about then? Why are you laughing at me posting bread?" And he's like,
I love
you're
it.
just funny." I was like, "Oh."
Yeah. Come on, mate. But I think, mate, I think that is an interesting side point. I think, I think particularly like Charmaine's asking about a blog. I think do it for yourself, put it out there, and just sow it and see what God does with it. I think don't, if God ends up taking something like that and amplifying it and using it, it'll be Him doing it, which is the point. But I think coming to the point you're saying there, I think we've got to, when we post stuff with like an intensity of wanting it to be liked or wanting it to
Mm.
change someone's life, want it to change the world, we sometimes just need to like be able to take things a little less seriously and laugh about them and have a bit
Yeah.
of fun with it as well. And I'm not condoning mocking people
Don't
for their
laugh at people's
passions.
passions. I mean, when you got someone like
No,
me He's just so passionate about flour, water, salt, and yeast, and then you're just mocking me. Unbelievable. Can't believe that.
Mate, I'm a fan. I think, hey, look, this is the. If you want Josh, if you're listening to this, we've got a good bit of feedback from the last podcast. So I'm going to put this out. If you want Josh to start his own baking,
yes, my own
company,
bread account.
Yeah, email josh.sosal@freedomchurch.cc.
Yes, I'll wait for
How many, Josh? If we get 50,
I'll
50
wait for
emails,
the flurry of emails to come in to let me know that they want bread.
Let's do it,
mate. Just talking about that. I just dropped the mate. Couldn't help myself. What about the last week? You said to me you'd had a few responses of people that have listened to the podcast and got some stuff from it.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, and just there's something. It's really helpful when you do hear back from people because I think I guess it affirms the value of these conversations. But I had at least 3 or 4 messages from people just taking the time to say, "Hey, listen to the podcast," and I found it really impacting. One person was just saying they found it really helpful around their kids, and I know that person's got younger children than the majority of ours right now. And I think it was just really helpful, and obviously that dad is wanting to be intentional. And they were saying it was really helpful thinking about shaping that. Somebody else, messaged back and just said, it was really helpful that you guys were being honest about the fact that struggle with social media and struggle with some of those things. And again, I think it's just all too easy that we have our struggles in our private place, and it's easier to assume that other people don't, particularly leaders in church. Right. And then I think finally was just around the majority of the messages I had in some way, shape or form. There wasn't loads, 4 or 5, but all of them basically acknowledged, I know I struggle to keep this healthy. I know I struggle. Every single one, whether there was an additional point as well. I just think that just goes to show, doesn't it, how much we have got to, as humans and as Christians, stay on top of this. It's not something that is probably going to change in the area. That's going to be something we have to keep coming back to, keep assessing, keep evaluating, keep talking about and learning from one another. So yeah, it was great. And if you took the time to message, thank you so much.
Yeah, we do appreciate it for sure.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, it was some great feedback this week. And I'll come back to someone that messaged in as well. I'll come back to that later. But then, okay, let's go on the next question then, Dave.
Yep.
And it says, do you challenge your partners with their usage on social media? So let's open up this minefield, shall we? Dave, you first.
Dave, you first. Under a bus. Thanks. Do you challenge your partner on social media? So is this a confession or am I advising? Okay, I think Saz and I have a very honest relationship about anything in our lives that we think is perhaps maybe out of balance. So the conversation of social media has definitely come up, and it's come up in both directions. So, just to say, it's not just me and it's not just Saz, but yes. So we do we challenge? Yeah, I think, but I guess, there's an undercurrent question to that is like, well, how do you do it? So, whenever you ask any question about challenging someone, whoever they are, the next question you have to ask is, how do you do it well? So Josh, what about you? And I'm going to float it back to you challenge. And if you do, how do you do it well?
Okay. Well, I think that, how do you challenge well? I think that for Rose and I, we have had conversations, but what I find is that it is best that you take care of your own log in your eye rather than try and deal with the speck in your partner. And I think that leading by example is the best way, because I think that does say something. And when one of us is on a drive to say, right, this needs to change, or I need to get back this rhythm, it does impact the other person just by the example.
Yeah,
so we can talk 100%. About our own decisions and our own change in patterns. That has the impact, rather than challenging it on the person and putting it to them. Actually just taking responsibility for ourselves first and foremost. Josh. When we do that, it has an impact, and we lead through that way. I think that it can be confrontational, it can be judgmental, it can cause division sometimes when you take that complaint to them. I think that there might be certain times where it's right to do that, but I think often our partners see us, are most relaxed. We're in the safety and security of our home. We don't want to feel judged. And I think that then to almost bring up some of those things sometimes, it can be a little bit difficult. I think if even sometimes, I don't know if you've seen those meme videos, it's like when your partners put down their phone and it's like they put it down and then you're still on your phone 3 seconds later and they're like looking at you, because it's like there's
Yes.
something of, oh, I've made my decision to, right, I need to be off my phone now, and you're still on yours. And I think we've got to be really careful that we don't put on our decisions
Yeah.
onto our partner, that our partner's got that you will get the most change when the person has taken responsibility and seen for themselves that something needs to change, rather than you pointing it out, rather than you saying
Yeah.
you need to do this. So I would not generally have a challenging conversation, but also Rose does display a very healthy regular evaluation of her
Yeah.
habits, of wanting to change things, of wanting to get things in line. So I don't feel the need to do that. And I feel more so the best way to speak aloud in our family is to deal with myself rather
Yeah.
than
100%.
trying to lead her to change.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think at the end of the day, the log in the eye, it's got no equity. It's got no, it's got no power to comment on somebody when you're not leading yourself. One of the things I think that's helped for Saz and I, in this area, is we have at least once a year we have like a vision/agreement conversation about the season to come. We tend to do it end of
That's a
November,
good way
December
of doing it, for
time.
sure.
We talk about the year that's been, and we just put everything on the table, and it doesn't tend to be just one conversation. It tends to be like just a seasonal awareness of looking back at the year that's been, and some of the areas we've won, some of the areas we've lost, some of the habits we've allowed in, some of the things that have been positive. And we try to establish, okay, what's the season ahead going to look like? And we come to a place of vision and agreement. And so if either one of us has to reflect it and say, hey, just to let you know, you've been on your phone a lot this week or something, if you have that conversation, it's from a place of, hey, do you remember when we had that conversation and you said you wanted to, just want to give you that nudge, just want to give you that. And again,
Nice.
I think it's better to not have to have those conversations.
Nice.
But if
Yeah.
you're having those conversations from a place of agreement and vision, and I think last thought on this is that it's very easy, and I've failed in this regularly, it's very easy to be unappreciative and uncaring of the reason why your partner's turned into social media in the first place. So just give you an honest conversation here. There was a season where Saz had said herself to me, I want to spend less time on my phone. And there'd been a period of time where maybe I'd come home from work and, engaged in family time, and Saz was quite quick to pick up the phone. And so I was then saying, hey, I thought you said, and there were times I said that well, and there were times I said that wrongly. But actually, when we talked about it, was realised that Saz had 4 kids in COVID, 4 kids all day, homeschool, everything. I'd been in work, but I'd been chatting with my mate, Josh, I've been, talking vision conversations. I've been this. The reason why Saz was picking up a phone was, I just need a break. I need a break. I've been nagged at. I've been hit. I've been pushed. I've been asked for food every 30 seconds. And actually, what we realized in that moment was the reason why Saz is turning to social media is actually she just needs a break.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we started to establish, and it wasn't like an everyday thing, was we started to realize, and there'd be times where I'd come home and be like, babe, go for a run. Just go for a run, right? It wasn't, oh, you haven't worked out enough, you need to do some exercises. Go get some headspace, because that's what she was doing. She was picking up the phone.
Yeah.
It's just looking for headspace. And so, replacing that with, hey, look, I see it, I get it. You've been at home. And I think just a shout out to, I guess, maybe predominantly the fathers in those early seasons of parenting, but perhaps, it might be that, it's the other way around, and maybe dads holding the family responsibilities. Whoever it is, when you come home from work, appreciate the weight that they've been holding. You might have been in a boardroom, whereas they've been playing in the bedroom with the kids. It's still an intensity. And so often we turn to social media because we're looking for something. And as partners, if we can appreciate and value and love our partners in that time and provide the space, rather than say, you shouldn't be on your phone, actually say, hey, babe, do you want to go and take a run? now, 15, 20 minutes, go get some headspace. Do you want to go get some headspace? It actually communicates value of what that person really needs in the moment rather than criticism of how they're seeking it in social media. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's
Yeah.
great stuff, Dave. Love that. I think it does really help coming out from a place of vision, rather so almost saying, right, what are we believing for together, rather than saying, I'm
Exactly.
believing for something for you to change. Let's talk about this. So I think that's great. Okay, so this next question says, if someone gets into a social debate, do you privately speak with them about it, or do you just let it play out? So I think we all know what this is talking about. These Facebook comment sections where something is said and it starts going off. And there can be a few fun versions like this about, what's your favorite dipping biscuit for a cup of tea. So
Rich tea,
it's not always bad. Rich tea.
100%.
Rich tea, Dave, that is going to disintegrate into a silt at the bottom of your
Mate,
bottom of your bottom of your mug, and you're going to be drinking biscuit at the end. Unbelievable
not if you've
choice.
got some skill to it. It's just you got to go, and
Oh
then you get it
my gosh! But then
saturated.
if you
I
don't know,
love
if you
it.
don't dip it, if you dip it too quick, then you're just going to get a splash of tea. It hasn't penetrated. If it penetrates, it
Oh,
breaks. This is.
I've
Do
nailed it, mate. I've
do
got
you
it
know what? This is the
saturated. Oh.
biscuit. This is the one. Okay, it's the dark chocolate McVitie's biscuit. You've got the kind of
The
the
hobnob.
bitterness. No, not the hobnob. The McVitie's,
Oh.
the dark chocolate McVitie's digestive. You dip that guy in, and he can hold up. He can hold up to the pressure. Your rich tea, he's fallen apart. He's lost himself. But the McVitie's can
Oh,
hold himself together, and you
dip
can
me again.
penetrate. And then yeah, Peter Kay, you know that gag. And the dark chocolate, the bitterness of the chocolate with the sweetness of the tea, a little bit, with the milk, or if you like me, like a bit of sugar. It is divine, absolutely divine.
I can't do chocolate and tea. I could do chocolate and
Oh my gosh,
coffee.
I'm
I'm with
actually
you.
just salivating just thinking about it now. Unbelievable.
So,
Sometimes I get people to bring them over from the UK, but you can get them
dude, that is
here,
a thing, man.
but they're about $7-8 a packet of biscuits, which is just a robbery.
Bro, I love a lot about America, but the biscuit game, and if you're a Southern American, I'm not talking about
You're
like
talking about
biscuits with
cookies for
gravy.
Americans,
I'm
yeah.
talking about cookies. Yeah, the cookie game, the biscuit game. Yeah, I'm sorry, that is a tip of the cap to the Brits.
Yeah.
It's still, yeah. Anyway, we have digressed. Would I jump in when Dave and Josh are digressing on biscuits? Um, okay. Do you step in? I think two things come to mind for me. First one is what's at stake. So I think getting involved to break up a fight, if you will, like the first question you ask is like, what's at stake, and particularly in the context of do you get involved, do you let it play out? I think if it's a bit of banter and it's a bit of healthy difference of opinion where people are sharing that with equity and with respect, more often than not, I'm going to lean out of that, because I'm going to let them be adults. I think if it's starting to go down that route, my nature, but I'm not saying that's necessarily right. My nature is I'm going to be I'm going to be assertive in and try to help that, particularly if there's something significant at stake. Be that primarily the unity of relationship, particularly within the church. The way that I would do that, and that would be my last resort, but the way that I would, if I felt that was necessary, is the second question I'd ask is, do I have the equity here to get involved? Do I actually know the people here? Interesting event happened not long after Saz and I moved here. It was about 11 o'clock, about 11:30 at night, and I just heard this shouting outside, and there was a fight going on, and it was a couple of doors up from my house, and it was two very, very drunk people. And this doesn't happen very often in our neighbourhood. In fact, it's the only time. And I could just hear it's escalating and it's screaming and it's this. And I'm holding out until I'm like, this is going too far. And so I went out. But one of the other things that I went out to do is I went out to de-escalate it, not to get involved in it. And actually, one of the things that I had at the time is I was sober and I wasn't involved in the situation. And so I could actually de escalate the situation. I think if you ever get involved in something, your role is to de escalate it. It's not to get involved in this side or get involved in that
Yeah.
side. And the key thing is equity in that. And so I would be having that privately. And if there was maybe somebody involved and I would just message say, hey, just want to ask you, I don't know if this is the wisest time to get involved in this conversation. Why don't you press pause on it? And then I'd have that conversation at a later point. But honestly, that would be only if it's starting to go down that road. I don't know if you're different, Josh.
Well, I think that generally I would stay out of it. There's almost no
Yeah.
debate, especially for any for anything that's going on online. I would never get involved online. So, for example, I'm getting involved in the comments section, and I'm going to stick up for this, and it's just not going to end well. And we talked a bit about why that is last week. You know, that people are already set in their ways, and they don't want to necessarily listen, and they're not really here. They're not really trying to understand or have a good debate. They're trying to make a point. And I think about how that doesn't really, and then I'm embroiled in it, you know, and I'm angry and I'm reacting, or so. No, I stay away from it, and I would encourage you to do the same. Don't get involved. I think the thing I would say is, if you see something online, don't get involved in an online way. But you can get can get involved in an offline way. So that might be reaching out to the person directly, having a conversation, speaking with them, and perhaps asking some questions or offering some advice. I think that if it was someone I was directly leading, so if it was one of my leaders here, for example, I would have a conversation with them. If it's just someone that I know, I wouldn't be having a conversation with them, because it's I'm weighing in on something that doesn't really have anything to do with me. So that those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, and just to be clear, just around the point I was making about de-escalating, I'm on the same page. I wouldn't do that by getting involved in the conversation at hand. It's a private thing of, you know, if I've got equity and it's really, really necessary, it's a private message. If somebody say, hey, I just think maybe take a step back from this in this moment. That's what I'd be encouraging somebody to do, rather than, I don't think you're right, or you're wrong, or the way you've spoken. It's just like, because most of the time, Josh, we're better than it. And that's the thing. Like, we are better than the conversations we allow ourselves to get involved in. Like, we're better than those mob moments. We're better than that. And actually, most of the time, it's just like, just step away from it for a second, bro. Step away from it. You don't need to get involved in that. So, you don't need to be a vigilante in those times. Stay out of it as much as possible.
I remember Perry Noble saying that when you want to stay out of fights like that, he said, because it's like getting in a fight with a pig and you're both rolling around in the mud, but the only difference is the pig enjoys it. And there's some truth in that, which is like, you know, sometimes you can almost take the hook and people are enjoying the fact that you've become embroiled in something, and it's like, actually you feel dirty after, and it didn't do you any good, and it didn't do the situation any good. So,
and it is interesting, Josh, isn't it? It's interesting about human nature that we've had a fascination with fighting. You know, we want to watch other people go hammer and tong. You know, for centuries, we've paid to watch people fight.
Yeah.
And we egg it on. And, you know, even I know I like combat. Fight. Yeah, exactly. You know, I like combat sports, but there is also a real line with it. And it's interesting that, you know, in the run up to fights, people will afterwards then say, oh, I was only doing that to sell the fight. I wanted to sell the animosity. I wanted to sell the thing.
For sure.
And I think it's really just looking at, if we're enjoying that as well, it's like, that's just not right, you know. So I hope that's helpful.
Definitely. So this next,
it's a good question though. It's a good question, and I think relationship has always got to be priority over opinion, and that's it, you know.
So this next question is from Meg Russell in our Cardiff campus.
Come on, Meg.
And Meg says, do you have any specific tactics you do to manage your own social media intake? For example, like times you're allowed to go on your phone, etc. So, Dave, do you want to give us any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've tried a few different things. I said it last week. I'm currently trying. I've got my main social media platforms that I engage in stuff on a separate device now. And what's interesting is I'm hardly checking them at all, which probably isn't that helpful because I need to engage in something as a as pastor and leader and whatnot. But I think my plan will be once in the morning, once in the afternoon,
Right.
evening, outside of times that other things should take priority. So I'm not going to check it first thing. My time with God, my time in the Word, working out, doing what we need to do as a family, that needs to take priority. So after that, and then in the afternoon, evening, I think probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to experiment with checking it 15 minutes before my first meeting, giving myself that room, and half an hour before I finish work at the end of the day and leave it in work. That's what I'm thinking. Things I've done in the past, I know you encouraged me to do this at one point. Certain phones, you can like knock those apps off for a certain amount of time. So
Yeah.
done that before, that was helpful. At the end of the day, most things we're trying to limit, you have to put yourself in a place of restriction. So you have to basically not let it be around you. And so you just got to figure out. So that's what I'm doing currently, and I found that helpful. I found it really helpful having it on a different device. But not all of us have got the room to do that.
Yeah.
So
I think that curbing back the relationship with your social media and taking breaks from it. We talked about this last week, but if you take times to fast, I would say a minimum a week. But I've done it for more than that. I think the most I've done is 3 weeks, and that was nothing. Just off everything, and that was really good. I think that then helps then temper some of your relationship with it, because I think that almost unhindered, it often just escalates. And I think that to almost regulate, you need to keep coming back to
good,
just
Josh.
taking regular breaks and just coming off it for a season. I think it's really good. So that's one that's worked for me. I think that one of the things that is very helpful that I've gone through different seasons of doing is just taking it out the bedroom as well. So it's not, charge your phone somewhere else, that it's not the first thing you do in the morning. It's not the last thing you do at night. That can also be a really good way of just curbing some of your tendency
That's really good, Josh.
to pick it up and be drawn to that. I think that there's a number of strategies really where you just need to almost reassess and reevaluate, what does my relationship look like at the moment. I think one of the things that I try and do, and I know Rose is very aware of as well, is that what does it look like in front of our children if they see us scrolling when we're around them. So one of the things is we try and protect them a little bit from, if we're around them, we don't want them to necessarily see that we are always scrolling through social media. Either we're, Rose is posting something. Rose has got amazing poetry account, and she's often like putting together something, thinking about words. So she's almost being really intentional around, right, I want to share something that's of value to me. But if we're just scrolling, if I'm on Twitter and I'm just sat next to a child and they're watching, like one of the rules that we have in our house is that we don't double screen, which means you're not watching.
Same.
Right, we're watching a family movie, but Dad's on his phone doing something else. It's like and we used to do a thing where Jude used to love this, who's our eldest and loves being in charge. He would come and confiscate our devices and put them away for the film time, so that there was no temptation there to be engaging in something else. But we have the rule where we don't want to double screen. If there's something else on, either leave the room and do what you need to do if you're messaging or answering something, or don't do it, because it sets a bad precedent. And then it's not that many years, Dave, we're going to have some teenagers sat around us with their own devices. And it's like, if we're not modeling it to them now, it's going to be even easier for them to go that way themselves.
100%. Yeah, and honestly, mate, this question I feel challenged about. So just again, if you're listening to this and maybe it's resonating, you go, oh, I don't personally think right now my balance in this area is where it should be. So, just encourage you if you feel that's the case. And I think one of the things that brings an imbalance for me is that I do so many different things on the same device. I work, I engage with my Bible, I listen to music, I keep in touch with friends, all these sorts of things. And I know Saz has started to do this. I know you do this, Josh. But started to trying to separate out some of the spaces that I do some of those different separate things. So Saz now reads her paper Bible. I love the Bible app. I absolutely love it. I find that I can really engage with God's word through it. I love staying in touch with it. I'm not a big book fan, but the reality is I'm reading my word, and to my kids, it looks like the exact same thing. Whereas what Saz really is exempling to our kids is they
good.
see her
It is good
out
for
on the
that.
porch, Bible open.
Mm.
I'm in my Bible. I like, even for you, Josh, I read books on my Kindle. You were down here recently with us, and you were having a bit of a break. Well, we were having a bit of a break together, but you were away from home and you've got your book and you're reading your book. And Josh is, sat at the pool or sat at our house, and he's engaging with something that is fun, that is different, that is, it's not work, it's not church, it's not this. And it's seeing that separate time. And, for me, something I've done in the past is try to only work on my laptop or my iPad, so that when I've got my laptop open, it says to the kids, Dad's engaging with work here.
Yeah.
He's not just on social. He's not just. So I think there's something about, because our phones in particular are amazing multifunctional tools, it doesn't communicate that multifunction to our kids. And particularly when it talks about modeling, when we're talking about modeling discipleship and time with God, I think it's absolutely key. And I feel definitely a bit of a hypocrite in saying that, because I'm not where I should be in that right now. So it's a good conversation. It's challenging, even on a personal level. So
come on, Dave. What about this one? Because this is around almost from a leadership perspective. This question, it says, how do you encourage someone that you're pastoring with the content that they're putting out if it's a bit too much? So, e.g., the bikini shots, or even some attention-seeking posts, perhaps. What are your thoughts on some of that? Because I know you've had these conversations.
Oh, yeah, I have. And I think I've had these conversations well, and I've had these conversations badly
It's tough,
as
isn't it?
well. It's tough. It's really tough. It's really, really tough. I think, I think, I think we keep talking about this, but in any leadership time, it starts with equity. So, because when you've got that equity relationship, hopefully it's going to help communicate the why behind your question better. People are going to know your heart. So, firstly, I would avoid as much as possible having a conversation with a woman that I'm leading about something in that area. That is something that I would want Saz to take the lead on, or we do that together. So I think firstly, you have it well within respecting those boundaries around gender and different things like that. So, I'm not going to be I'm going to avoid pulling a single female leader across, but I think the best way to do it is to not just start with, hey, you're posting that and you should stop posting that, but actually asking the question, why are you posting that? And do you think that reflects what God would want you to post? And does that line up with the example that you want to set for people? Because what that does is it puts the person in the position that is the most important position, is thinking about, is how I'm influencing others the reflecting how God would want me to influence them? And actually trying to bring somebody to God in that conversation, not to me in that conversation, is key. Because I'm going to have different thresholds of what I think is right, is wrong. Some of them are going to be just downright correct, and others are going to be my personality. Some of them are going to be my disposition. So bringing it back to God, bringing it back to Scripture, and bringing it back to responsibility. Is that actually leading people? And sometimes people can be innocent and not just ignorant. Sometimes people don't understand and don't see. And so sometimes it's helpful to say, I just need to let you know that actually some people could really take that as actually quite provocative. I didn't even think. And I think there are times where we can say, oh, I didn't even think, when we knew. But there are also, honestly, within the generation that we live in now, with the saturation of stuff, mate, the stuff that makes it into adverts now would have been classed as pornographic when I was growing up. Like it would have been in that world. So there are people around me, particularly younger generation, that are so
Yeah.
desensitized that actually part of our job as leaders is to resensitize. There's such a powerful scripture, and it was talking about, I can't remember the reference, I'll find it if somebody needs it, but it says, I think it's in Romans, and it says, and they lost all sensitivity and gave themselves over to sensuality. In other words, there was a generation at the time, and I think it's Romans 1, 2, or 3, it's in there, and it's talking particularly about humanity's fall in sexual ethics and sexual sin, and it's saying that humanity lost all sensitivity and gave itself over to sensuality. We actually need to re-educate sensitivity, that actually you need to have a greater degree of spiritual sensitivity to that shot. So I think trying to bring somebody back to Jesus, back to the word, back to discipleship, putting them in a place of responsibility, that what they're putting out actually is having an impact on somebody else. Because I think about my areas of the life that I've changed, when the things that have caused me to change the most have been the things that are either not God's heart, not God's way, but powerfully when it impacts others. The conversations I've had to have around areas that I've led poorly, when it's resulted in having a really bad impact on somebody, those are the ones that have stayed with me. Those are the ones that have been hard. Those are the ones that have motivated me to change the most. Because actually, if my actions can have a poor impact on somebody, I want to change. I've got to change. So I think trying to lead people to that kind of dialogue is going to hopefully result in a more fruitful long-term change. But sometimes, I've had all the best, I've had all the loving, I've got
Yeah.
all, and it's still just come down to, mate, that's not right.
I think, to be honest, one of the things that that's really important, you mentioned this, Dave, was just understanding that some people don't realize this.
Yeah.
It's just they've overlooked. And you think about someone that's not come from our church or a Christian background. And let's say we know that people follow a lot more people than this, but let's say they've got 100 follows and 100 people that regularly post in their lives, old friends and people they know, and they've just come into Christian community, but they're scrolling, and what they are feeding from and ingesting on
Yeah.
their social media is people posting pictures of themselves on the beach or selfies or posing or pouts and all this kind of stuff that seems quite self-centric to someone that is living a very a background that has been raised in
Yeah.
Christianity. And then you think about your perspective, where you follow some biblical accounts, some church leaders, you follow people from church, and this one person you see posting pictures of themselves that seem inappropriate, but within their context they fit right in their feed.
Yeah.
It doesn't stand out to them at all. Actually, it's the same as everybody else. It's what all their friends do. It's just something, hey, it's the summertime and I'm enjoying being at the beach. And they have given it no thought whatsoever. And there is a journey of change and transformation that people take from being from an old community of old values and old priorities into new life. And I think that sometimes we need to be gracious and understanding with people,
Yeah.
that they are on a journey and they haven't realized it yet. And they will start to understand it through discipleship. They'll start to understand it through being in that community, the more that they follow or connect to. And I've seen this a lot over the years where people become absorbed into a Christ-like community and they start to take on the ways of that
Yeah.
community.
100%.
Oh, actually, I understand now. That's not appropriate. It doesn't feel right, because they're feeding from that more. That's influencing them more than their old world. But sometimes there's some time. Now, that's not always the case. And sometimes you've got some anomalies there where people are from that world and they are making poor choices. And I think that sometimes you do just have to have the conversation and say, actually, do you realize that when you post this, that it has
Yeah.
this kind of impact? Do you know that? And sometimes they could be like,
Yeah.
hey, I didn't realize. And sometimes like, well, and it goes into a different direction, different conversation, and that's something
Yeah.
else to deal with.
Yeah. Definitely, mate. Definitely. And I think, one of the things I love about the Chosen series, obviously if you haven't watched it, it's a brilliant televised kind of depiction of the Gospels. Is I love how it brings to life how unfinished the disciples were on the journey, and how they are around Christ himself, hearing truth from the literal words of truth from the very truth himself, watching miracles, and yet they don't get
Still
it,
getting it
and
wrong.
yet they still get it wrong. They still fail. And if anybody's thinking that either Josh or I are saying it's okay to compromise, we're not. If you know us, we feel passionately about the reality of sin and God's perspective towards it. But what we're talking about is the human being on the journey. And actually, Jesus had room. He never compromised. He always knew what the end goal was. He was going to take these guys to a place of such commitment, such conviction, they'd very die for their faith. And yet, he's okay to walk the journey. And he goes with them. And I think there's something, I've got that wrong. I've got that wrong at times. But I think one of the things in this, Josh, and Saz will always say this, and I find it so challenging, those conversations need to be led by the Holy Spirit. You know, because what gave Jesus the capacity to walk with Peter through his failures is the leading of the Father, the ministry of the Holy Spirit. And so all too often we forget that piece. But actually going into this conversation, say, Holy Spirit, lead me, Holy Spirit, guide me, you know, and also even having like realistic wins of, they're probably not going to all change tomorrow, but it's going to change in time, you know. And I think a word to the parents out there, educate your children about, not about fashion, but about what that fashion portrays. Eden came home not that long ago from a friend's house, and they'd been doing this colouring in, and she came home with these 4 or 5 printouts, and they weren't horrendous, but they were definitely not things that I would want her to aspire to. And she came home and she goes, Dad, look at these. Oh, these are really cool. And I'm thinking, what? And so instead of reacting and going, confiscating, right, you're not having them. I said to her, I said, Ede, because one of the other kids, I said, hey, babe, I'm excited about this. Can we just have a chat about these later? She's like, oh, okay. We'll talk about it later. And then just sat down with her, and I just said to her, Ede, can I ask you, what do you think that picture says? What do you think about the way that person's wearing that top? Do you think, because that part of our body, is it a public or is it a private part of it? Oh, it's more private. Do you think that top? And we ended up having this 30, 40, 50-minute conversation where by the end of it, I just asked her, I said, do you think that like you want to dress like this? And she's like, no, I like that. And I said, yeah, that's cool. But what about that bit? She's like, yeah, no. And I said, so can I ask you, babe, do you think it's going to help looking at these pictures lots now? She's like, oh, probably not. Now, again, not all of the, very few of my parenting conversations go that well, okay? So I don't want to like appear to be, but I think the point of what I'm trying to pull out there is she was a victim in that, and it wasn't a horrendous thing, but it wasn't her fault. She'd been around it. Going on the journey actually won her to it. And if we can try and do that, I think it will help, you know, with our kids as well.
Great stuff.
So,
well, thanks, Dave. I'm just going to finish with this this message we had sent in. It says, not so much a question, but a statement or testimony after listening to the latest podcast and this latest Uncontainable series. I've decided to remove social media as God has challenged my use of it and the way I've been using it to replace elements of God. And after listening to a song, Take Off My Shoes, I realized it's a Delirious classic, by the way, if you don't know that one. I realized I've been replacing or ignoring the throne room and getting that fix from social media. So thanks for the challenge that you and Dave brought on the latest podcast. And sometimes that's what you need to do. You just need to cut it out and take a step away from it completely. So I just wanted to finish with that. And hopefully these conversations have been helping you. They've been encouraging you. They've been sharpening you. We love to hear from you guys when you message in or write out on social media itself about the podcast. So, guys, thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. Thank you, Dave. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks, mate.
Bye-bye.
Rich teas for the win.